And to have this conversation with Charlotte, I'm calling on stage Julie Andrews, Managing Partner at Jean Bar Capital. Welcome, Julie. Ife Duro-Sinmi-Eti, CEO Economy, sorry. Julian Good, Managing Partner at Venus, and Daniel Mullins, General Partner at Seven Venture Fund. Have a very great session.
All right. So, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon.
Everyone's probably in a little bit of a post-lunch fog, I'm imagining, so we'll have to get the energy back up in the room. As was mentioned, I'm Charlotte Newman. I head up Amazon Web Services startups work to reach underrepresented founders and investors. And as a former founder, it's been a great privilege to lead this work, which is focused on how we create both programs that really move the needle for founders and form partnerships with ecosystem partners around the world. I spend maybe every day thinking about how do you actually strengthen the role of women in startup ecosystems everywhere. I'm really excited about Network, proud to Network. Happy to be today in conversation with such a great group. What I'd like to do just to kick off is to turn to each of you and ask you to introduce yourself for about a minute. I'll start with Julie right here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody.
I'm very happy to be here participating in this panel. So I'm Julie Andrews. I'm the managing partner of Jean Bar Capital, which is a female-led VC fund headquartered here in Dakar. We invest in seed stage impact tech startups across the continent.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Ife Duro-Sinmi-Eti. I'm the founder of Herconomy. Herconomy is a financial technology platform that provides women with high-yield savings accounts and women-centric products, discounts on women-centric products and services. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Julien Gut. I'm a pre-seed seed investor. I invest in the entire continent with a focus on West and North Africa, Nigeria and Egypt included. And it's never too early to start a conversation.
Hi, Tahir. I'm partner at Savant. We are a hardware and deep tech VC, historically focusing on pre-seed and going all the way to Series A. We also have an incubator and an acceleration program to help companies get ready for investment.
All right, Tahir and I were just in Cairo, so it's great to see you here today in Dakar as well. Where I want to start the conversation is to pick up with the founder voice first, right, Ife? That's at the heart of this discussion. And what I really want to dive in on is to talk first about the challenges as we think about the role of women in startup ecosystems across the continent. I'd love to have you describe a bit from your personal perspective what you see as some of the main challenges that women currently face when they're starting new ventures.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that question, and it's very, very important that we actually address some of these challenges. I would say that one of the top challenges is actually funding for women. So right now, globally, there are only about 892 women who have actually raised over $1 million, and you would see thousands and millions of men if you want to do a comparison. So that just shows you that we don't have enough people who are actually looking at women to give women money. So that also trickles down to say that people actually don't believe in what these women are actually building. So the first thing I would say, first challenge is obviously funding. And I'm excited to see that today there are more gender lens focused funds, because if we're not intentional about creating those funds, those accelerator programs, that's another challenge where the women are not really mentored for the VC space, because the VC space, there are different kinds of businesses that you can do, but if you want to backable or VC backable business, you have to build your business in a certain way. You have to grow fast. You have to understand certain terminologies. You have to know, like before I started my business, I personally started as a community, and I wasn't necessarily thinking about growing it, you know, the VC way, right? And it was very difficult for me to start understanding how to navigate that space. But thank God for a program like Startup Bootcamp who came along the way and showed us that there are things like AWS credits, for example, which we got as well. Thank God, thank you. And if you don't have that support, if you don't have that network, if you don't have that ecosystem that you can actually rely on, you would just be pouring water in a basket. So you, as women, you need to have that community. You need to have people you can rely on, that you can ask questions, because these things, they're not readily available if you don't have the right people to ask these questions to. So those are some of the challenges that women face: not having the right, you know, support network when you're starting out your business, not being able to get access to investors, not being able to have access to those communities. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Ife. It's interesting. So my team surveyed founders all over the world, and two of the things that you talked about made it to the top 5 of that list: fundraising and community. I think oftentimes fundraising, of course, comes up in every conversation you'd have like this, no matter where it is. Fundraising is so critical. But community, I think, is often an aspect that's overlooked. You don't necessarily always hear founders call that out. But I think as a former founder, I know how important it is, especially to be in conversation with other founders, to learn from each other. There's, of course, the role of advisors and your board, but there's also a lot that you can learn through peer mentorship. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. I'm going to come to the rest of the panel, the investors in the group. And, you know, we'll of course talk a little bit more about fundraising, but just also starting with that broad question of what are some of the challenges that you see, and we'll turn to the opportunities in a second, because we all want to hear about solutions, right? But just to dive in a little bit more on challenges, coming to you first, Julie, and then going through the rest of the panel, can you talk a bit about some of the challenges that you see, both for women who sit in founder seats, but also for women who sit in seats as GPs and who are within the venture capital space as well?
Yes, sure, thank you. So actually, and as you say, we always come back to fundraising. And as a first-time female fund manager, the biggest challenge was fundraising. Of course, everybody's able to fundraise, but I think the challenge is we should have more limited partners coming from the continent, because most of our investors are either from Europe, the US, and I think that we have to try and shift a bit the mindset in terms of investing, particularly here in Francophone Africa, where most of the investment goes towards something maybe more tangible like real estate. And I think we have to change this optic and show them that tech is participating in digitizing key economic sectors here in Africa, addressing urgent needs in many areas, and we should all, you know, be together in this. And I think this is a big challenge.
I'm so glad you brought up the role of LPs. You know, LPs, of course, play a really important role here as we start talking about how do you shift the ecosystem. You may take it in a different direction, Julian, but I wanted to make note of that. Julian, turning to you, what are your thoughts on some of the challenges that you've seen as an investor?
So I think at the end of the day, if we really want to change the table or turn around the table a little bit, we need to make sure that at every place in the ecosystem, at every place where we make decisions in the ecosystem, we have women. That's true at the startups level, where you need people in the funding team, you need people in the you need women in the management team, you need women in the board room as well. But if you look at the ecosystem of the investors, if I look at my own fund, I need to make sure I have female women at the investment committee side, at the GP side as well, but as well as LPs. If I look at my investor base, I have only less than 5% of the LPs that are female-driven. So if we really want to change the narrative, we need to make sure that at every stage when the decisions are made, we put women. And I'm really struggling on my side to find more women to invest in the fund. Because I think I discussed with a few people in the US, in Europe, the kind of generational wealth needed to bring LPs in a fund is not yet controlled by women. That's going to change. I think we are witnessing a generation of wealth created by women that are coming up, but it's going to take 1 or 2 generations still. So I think we need to be patient with that. On the other hand, when I looked at my own deal flow, I have very, very few female-driven funding team. And that need to change. And there's a very practical way now we can change it, because if we looked at the quality of the deal flow and of all the VC pipeline over the past 2 or 3 years, the quality and the depth of the deal flow changed dramatically for one, in my opinion, for one single reason. It's because we witnessed the rise of the mafias. You know, remember like in the early days in the US, you had the PayPal mafia, all those guys that created, like Elon Musk and so on, created other businesses after PayPal, but we are seeing the same network effect in Africa. We have the Flutterwave guys, we have the Jumia guys, the Glovo guys, the MFS Africa guys, all those young managers that know how to run hypergrowth, how to talk to VCs. They all got the curriculum. But if we look at the management team of those early, unicorns, they are all male. So us as investors, if we really want to change something, we need to make sure that within our investee company, we need to put and to encourage women to be part of the management team. Not the funding team, but at least the management team. Just to make sure that they got the right curriculum, and when they want to do something, they're going to have the right credential for us investors to invest in. So I think we need to put women in position of decision making at the end of the day. So.
Yeah, this point on decision making and looking at every point essentially in the value chain, if you think about it, and startup ecosystems, and looking to influence those points and ensure that women are at every point, I think that that's definitely a takeaway that I'll have from the conversation. So now coming to you, Tahir.
You guys are like seeing everything.
So we've talked about LPs, right? Clearly that's one stakeholder if we think about the startup ecosystem. We've talked a bit about VCs. We started with the founder voice. Is there anyone that we're missing as we talk about challenges? What's your perspective on kind of that stakeholder breakdown? Who really sort of moves the needle or could move the needle in terms of shifting things for women in startup ecosystems across the continent?
So I think when we look at any of this, there's a question or a point around intentionality that Ife mentioned, and seeing that all the way through the system. And so if I just look back, or you just look at the stats, on this continent, 50% of the population is female, but then, hey? Really? Yeah, I looked it up this morning. When you look at the State of Tech in Africa report, when you're looking at tech startups, in 2019, 20% had female representation in the founders, in the sort of founding team. But you move forward to the end of the last year that it was compiled, and that shifted down to 16%. Despite a significant sort of J-curve and an increase in allocations to startups. So, what that tells us is that money is still not going the right way, even more so now than before. And the only way to break that cycle is through intentionality. And intentionality doesn't just start at a community level. It doesn't just happen at an investor level. It actually also happens sort of at a governmental level, because if you think about who's doing most of the allocations across Africa, it's your DFIs, where they're getting their money from, So if you sort of have these states that are now putting in regulations, and I'm not saying we should be over-regulated, but there are incentives in place to stimulate this kind of thing, it becomes easier for the LPs to also put those into their mandates, which then gets carried over to the fund managers, and that goes further downstream to the startups as well. And what you start seeing happening is, because the LPs and the fund managers need to really see this pipeline. You start seeing them saying, okay, what are you doing with enterprise support organizations? We need that to help us curate this pipeline, to help develop those communities more so that they are more robust, so that we can say there's a really cool investment case for this particular company now. So, you know, government has a big role to play. The timeline to that, I don't know. I do think that government shouldn't be overlooked. Yeah.
Okay, so government is also a stakeholder in the conversation, certainly. We've seen in some markets, for example, government requiring, let's say, women to sit on board seats, to have a certain percentage of board seats. That's one example of what that can look like. But also from your example, if we think about where government shows up in the LP base, it's driving greater requirements or asking more questions. What do you see?
So I actually have, so a lot of people don't like this particular law in South Africa, but so we've got a BEE Act, it's Black Empowerment Act. Just because of what happened historically, so it's about redress and making sure that there's more wealth allocation to other parts of the population, and more people can actually, who were previously disadvantaged, actually participate beneficially economically. So as much as a lot of people don't actually like that particular law, because it creates a burden potentially on companies, if you look at what has come out of that as a result, right? So we've had so many new initiatives and so forth coming out of that have actually empowered people who previously wouldn't have access to opportunities, who would have to fight that much harder to get those opportunities over the line. And then even with the SASME fund in particular, if you look at their mandate, they're a fund-of-fund manager, an LP, and they are supporting black fund managers, but also supporting fund managers that have an allocation to black founders in startups. So regulation, it does work. I think if we had something similar for women-led founders, we would definitely see a lot more happening.
Yeah, thank you for that. As someone who spent years working for a United States senator, I certainly understand the importance of policy and think that there is a role for governments to play across the continent, not just from the sort of LP perspective that we were talking about in terms of FDI, but also from this vantage point that you're talking about. Now, shifting the conversation a little bit, it's been great hearing from the investors on the panel and having you call out the various challenges that you see from your seats, and even beginning to touch on some of the opportunities or some of the ways that these challenges can be fixed. I want to turn more towards that part of the conversation. If we pick up these various points, whether we're talking about kind of the LPs in the conversation or we're talking about what VCs could be doing more, I want to go a layer deeper. So looking at those different stakeholders who all play a role as we think about that value chain again, I'd like to hear more from you on what you'd like to see those individual stakeholders do. And one that we haven't talked about is the corporate community. Putting myself a little bit on the hot seat, what could companies like AWS, for example, do more of? So include that in your answers as well. I'll come back to you, Ife, to get your perspective and then go to others on the panel.
Okay, so personally, I feel like we all have to be part of that value chain. So for example, I'm a startup, but I still invest in other startups. I still give out grants to other startups, right? So we all have a role to play. I've also seen corporates investing in angel funds, so in groups. So I've seen the likes of commercial banks in Nigeria investing in a Rising Tide, for example, or investing through a Rising Tide, which is, a group of female angels who have come together to start investing. So I'm seeing a lot of people who are now taking investing more seriously and going through, different various channels to actually invest in startups like us. I'm also seeing governments. So if you look at countries like Kenya, for example, I'm seeing there's a government play, with Safaricom and all of that. So I'm seeing more and more people are now getting more interested in the startup ecosystem and investing in, the small startups that are there. Yeah. Thank you.
Now, coming back to you, Julie.
Yes, I'd say that we're very lucky here in Africa because the ecosystem is very cooperative, and we should leverage on that because we all have the same goal, which is to pull it up as much as we can, right? So we all have an important role to play, and we're all binded to one another. So capital is important. VCs should give capital to startups, but not only, and I don't think it's the most important component. I think we should have a different role, which is to accompany the startups, help them grow, help them scale, introduce them, leverage on our networks, on different partnerships, public or private partnerships. And I think this is really key, especially when you're investing early stage, to help them scale and let them move to the next step. Then I think something else is very important is communication. I feel that in general, founders don't know all the initiatives that are out there. And I think there are a lot and there should be more, but there are very important ones and nobody's aware of it. And so there's a lack of communication, and I think it could be game changer.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's almost, it's kind of low-hanging fruit when you talk about just increasing communication and ensuring that there's greater collaboration. Kind of picking up a little bit on that piece in particular before I turn to Julian and Tahir. I was just in Kenya and having conversations with investors there and founders, and that was one of the key kind of points that came out, that a lot of value would be served just by convening people more often for information sharing. Julian, coming to you and to Tahir next, what are your thoughts on this point about increasing collaboration? Do you see opportunities for that in the seats where you sit here in Dakar and in Cape Town? Coming to you next, yeah.
I'm not sure I'm gonna fully address your question, but I think I'm gonna relate to it. But I think
so the through line that we're on right now is kind of thinking about like what are the ways to shift some of the problems that we started out outlining. And I think that Julie rightfully pointed to that there is a lot of collaboration, but there's still opportunities to increase collaboration and communication amongst the stakeholders that we've ironed out. So we've talked about the role of the founder, the role of VCs, the LPs. So if we pick up on that point about collaboration and communication, what opportunities do you see?
Yeah, no, I got it, but let me develop a little bit. So I think I want to come back to your point. So which were, I think it's extremely important for any entrepreneur to have role models and to be able to say, she did it, I can do it as well, okay? And I think we miss that. So I think we need more role model and we need more mentorship from women to other women. Specifically on one key subject, in my opinion, because when I discuss with, the best time to start a tech startup is when you have experience. You are in your 30s, that's exactly when you want to start a family as well. So, and I have a lot of female founders that I discuss with, but Julien, how do I run a new startup and how do I have a family in the same time? And I think everybody in the ecosystem should have the same reaction, say, it's okay, you can do it. Many people did it, and I'm gonna connect you with people that did it as well. And we're gonna help you to put system in place to have a baby or to have young kids, to run your family and be a successful entrepreneur as well. So I think that if you talk about collaboration into the ecosystem, we need all together to be extremely supportive to a young woman in their 30s that wants to create a startup and have a family in the same time. So I think that's the best collaboration. We need a village, we need an ecosystem to raise a kid. Okay, that's basically what I would like to say here.
Yeah, I think it's always important to be able to say, like, it's possible, right? I think that's hugely important. You need to be able to look out and to see individuals who have already done the thing that you want to do, whatever it is. So changing the question a little bit, Tahir, let's think a little bit about some of the success stories that you've seen. And I'm going to come back to Julian and Julie with this question as well. For founders that you've invested in, and maybe Ife too, you said you're writing checks as well. So Tahir, for founders that you have invested in, talking about women-led startups in particular, what can you call out a success story and what moved the needle for that founder? We'd love to hear a bit, going back to this kind of idea about the role of examples. what's one of the shining stars that you've invested in, and what are some of the lessons that can be drawn out from that founder to posit with this audience?
So I can talk about two potential success stories. One that's a success with an alternative perspective. So the one company actually is it's in our portfolio. It's a point of sale advertising opportunity, and that one in particular we took from pre-seed. Now it is now in seed stage, going into Series A pretty soon, doing really well. And that is a female-founded company. And one of the things that we did when we onboarded them was we made sure that she was given a voice, you know. So we listened, we sat, you know, we engaged. So we were quite supportive in that sense. But what really helped was that we actually believed in her capabilities, because we looked at her background and we said, you're 100% what this business needs. So, you know, I think there's support, and then just making sure that there's potentially a dedicated ear to that founder or founding team is really, really helpful. So I mentioned before, we do incubation, we got an accelerator program and a VC. And in our incubator, you know, we had a company that didn't sort of make it commercially. You know, they died before they got to market. It was 4 female founders. And we always knew going into it that it may or may not work, but we actually supported them, because if it worked, it would be great. But what was more important, what was going to come out of that process, right? So sometimes, you know, as an enterprise support organization, you actually need to look at the bigger picture. You know, that very first opportunity that you back isn't necessarily going to be the opportunity that makes it, but that founder is going to learn tremendously and then move to a follow-on opportunity and take those learnings with him. And so, you know, there were 4 females, 2 of them went into corporate, 1 decided to pursue an academic, scientific career, and the other one actually went into to lead another startup, and then she's now since launched her own genomics startup, you know, and she's doing really well. So, you know, success isn't just backing somebody and making sure that they win with that particular idea or opportunity. It's making sure that you enable them to succeed beyond that in the future. So.
Absolutely. Coming to Ife in the middle, as we think about this question about success stories, are there any founders that you have, you mentioned kind of playing a role in helping to back other startups. What does that look like?
Yeah, so I like to say this kind of thing in stories. So there was a lady I met, her name is Sheun, she's the founder of Fez Logistics. I met her in 2018, you know, helped her, you know, understand how to pitch, things like that, and then she eventually decided to launch her startup. 2022, she eventually won a grant from us, which was about 1.5 million, which is approximately $5,000. So she won that, and because the grant competition that we normally run every year is very, very visible, so she got a lot of visibility from that. She was able to collaborate with different organizations. She was able to get, you know, partnerships with the likes of Kuda Bank and Flutterwave, which increased her reach and the number of cards. So she now became like their preferred card delivery partner. So things like things that helped her were obviously mentorship, things like collaborating with other organizations, also visibility. So it's very important for organizations who have the eyes of the people to actually spotlight the women who are actually doing great work, and that way they're able to go out and launch businesses on their own, go out and scale businesses. Today, just last month, she announced a raise of over $1 million, and like I said, there are only 892 women who have done that in the world, so it's a big deal. So it's very, very important for you to spotlight those women, and they can literally go from 0 to 100 in a year if you actually give them the support, the mentorship, the partnerships, and all of that they need. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that, and I think what you're calling out is really everyone in the audience has a role to play, essentially, in helping to ensure that women are where they should be in the ecosystem, going back to the kind of the value chain idea. We're all a part of the conversation. Coming first to you, and then to you, Julian, to pick up on this conversation.
I just wanted to add that often and I'm sorry to say that for the men out here, but men always feel they deserve more, and women always feel they deserve less. And so there's a lack of confidence. And I think women should be able, entrepreneurs, and I feel like I'm like an entrepreneur because raising a fund is the same thing, right? It's very difficult. We're in the same boat. And I feel that if you are able to put yourself out there, be more confident, and I'm thinking of a female founder who's actually right here in the crown, Biram Sok, who with Kweli, I think, and we're in Senegal, so I'd like to talk a bit about her. That's why, I mean, she's an example. She was able to leverage on her network and have a very successful startup, and she's a serial entrepreneur. I think this is very important, and it's really key to be able to unlock this. And I also believe that female founders should tap into VC female-led funds as a stepping stone, so that we're able, to help them, connect them with the right person, and then they can go onwards from that.
Absolutely. Julian?
I'm very sorry, but the sound is so bad that I cannot get what you say. So can you repeat, please?
Oh, the sound is so bad. So we're just continuing this thread on opportunities and talking a bit about specifically the role that we all play in helping to ensure that women, just continuing the conversation.
I think, I don't want to repeat myself, but I think we, intentionally or not, I think we need to make sure women are in places where decisions are made. I think that's all. If we have to focus on something, that's where we need to all make sure we play our part, okay? And we have all a responsibility. You as a GP, you as a founder, anybody in the ecosystem can. We have some LPs as well. So I think
awesome. I'm getting the signal that we're at time. So as we move to get some questions from the audience.
Yeah, we can take one question in the audience for sure. Question in the audience?
While we're waiting on a question from the audience, Eva wanted to pick up on one piece, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I wanted to add, like as a founder, a female founder, I feel like it's important for you to create your own table. And I would just like to say my own story very briefly. So when we wanted to pivot to financial services to build our own fintech, at the time, it was very difficult. It seemed like it was very difficult to raise. But because we had already built a community and we already had created impact, for like people within the community had already benefited from the work that we were doing. I just went back to the community and I said, if you're interested in investing in what we're building, please let me know. And in 24 hours, we're able to raise $600,000. So it's very important for you, and this included individuals, angels, and VCs. So it's very important for you to be able to create that table, because if I didn't take that chance on myself, if I didn't believe in what I was building, I would have been running from VC to VC, trying to explain what I was trying to build, and no one would have gotten it. And one of the investors who actually backed me is actually in this room, Octera Capital. They actually believed in what we were doing, and at the time, it was very, very difficult for us to explain what we're trying to build and why community was at the heart of what we're doing. Like I said, for women, it's very, very difficult. He mentioned that it's important for women to see other people who are role models, who would say, person A did it, so I can do it, which is why, as we're giving these women the bank accounts right now, we're also giving them access to community to see other women who are doing big things like them. So we have so many people, out of the 892 women who have raised funding, over 1 million, I have a lot of those women within my community. So if other people are seeing these women and are tapping into their network, their knowledge, they're building their capacity, then they know that, well, if it's not this year, it would eventually happen for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Turning to the question in the audience.
Hi. I've talked to a lot of female founders, and I kind of agree with you, Julie, what you said. Like, we ask for less. I don't, like, sometimes when I have discussions with other female founders and we talk about how much they're raising, it's always below what other all the male startup founders are raising, which is, I think that needs to change. And I think there's a lot of female entrepreneurs actually, but they're just not here. They're building their own business. They're not coming here to pitch. They're doing it by themselves. And there's a lot of phenomenal women out there, and I see it every day. I mean, there's community mothers who have their own businesses. They're out there, but I think how do we get those women to showcase what they're doing and to raise the right money? Because, I have a friend who has a school. She's asking for, I think, a quota of what she should be asking for. And, how do we change that mindset? How do we get ourselves a little bit higher to say, don't ask for this, you deserve more than that? So I don't know, maybe it's a question, maybe a question more comment also. I think community, I think it's great what you're doing for women, because we kind of need to kind of teach the other ones, hey, you can also do it. I mean, you can be up here, you can ask for $1 million, you can ask for $2 million. Who says what you should ask for? So I think this is very important, and I appreciate what you're doing with your communities.
Thanks, Gabi.
We have another question here.
So just one last question.
Thank you so much. I wanted to understand from all of your perspectives the value of an accelerator versus capital. From my perspective, I think giving women the capital to do it is much better than taking them through an accelerator program. But I just wanted to hear your thoughts.
Why are they mutually exclusive? Okay. But we're assuming that you're choosing between the two.
Well, I think there's been a bit of a push where there's a lot of accelerators, specifically trying to help women, but sometimes they don't have capital on the end, or sometimes the accelerator spends most of the money on kind of getting mentors and kind of those things, rather than actually giving women, you pitch us, you get 100K or something like that. Just what would, in your opinion, make the most difference, maybe?
Got it.
I can take that one.
Julie was also, do you want to start?
I just wanted to say that I used an accelerator to do the venture capital fund, and they didn't give us money, but they were key and a game changer for us, because we were able to close way faster than if we were on our own. We were able to avoid all the mistakes that we would have probably done if we were on our own. And I really think it's very important to have this structure with you. And I do recommend it for funds, for startups. I think it's really, really very important.
Julian, you also wanted to pick up on this.
I worked a bit in the media space, and we have a say where we say content is king, but distribution is King Kong. And I would say, if I do the analogy with your question, I would say accelerator is king, but capital is King Kong. Yeah.
That's a good analogy. Any last question? So just to kind of close out the conversation, I think that there have been a number of points across the discussion. A few stand out to me. One, I certainly leave with the takeaway of the importance of increasing communication and collaboration within ecosystems to ensure that there's information sharing. I think, Ife, you talked about the importance of fundraising, and capital, right? Going back to this, capital is King Kong, right? At the end of the day, it's the life's blood of anything that you're building. You need the capital to keep going. And then, Julian, I think what I take from your contributions is certainly the piece about the value chain and what each of us can do, whether you're an LP in the room, a GP, a founder, or you play a role in the government. Everyone has something that they can do to ensure that women have a seat at the table in ecosystems across the continent. And then to hear, you offered the piece about government, but you also talked about some of the examples that you've seen and what has really moved the needle for women in the ecosystem that you sit in. So this has been a great discussion. Thank you again to each of the panelists for taking some time out and being in conversation. If you haven't stopped by the AWS booth, please stop by and say hello, or feel free to find me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Charlotte. Thanks to all our speakers for this very interesting panel about women in tech. Thanks a lot.